And Representative Sampson has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Please forgive me. I was just handed this language a few moments ago, too, and I am trying to digest the changes that have become part of the proposed bill in front of us. But let me just start by saying, Mr. Chairman, that I'm very disappointed to see this legislation here before us, because I think it is here not as a measure of good policy, but because of its political purpose and potential. Clearly, there has been a lot of emotion that has been stirred up since the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And I know that it's a contentious political environment across the entire country, and stands to be a contentious political environment over the next several months as we gear up for a November election here in Connecticut. And this, to me, is just one in a series of bills that is designed to distract from the state of our economy in Connecticut and to take people's minds off of the changes that need to happen to get our state moving back in the right direction. And I just don't think it's ever a good idea for us to make public policy when it is based solely on an emotional reaction without stopping to consider the ramifications of changes to the way we treat our citizens. It's also interesting that we would have these, this bill and another bill that would ban another type of firearm product on our agenda today, since Connecticut arguably has the most restrictive gun control laws in the entire country. And in fact, I think it's interesting because if you look at all of the lists of types of gun control that could possibly be done, you'd have to go pretty far down the list to get to bump stocks. We've already passed almost every type of gun control there is in Connecticut. We have bans on various types of assault weapons. We've expanded those bans. We limit the capacity of magazines. We require universal background checks. We require people to have a permit to buy all types of weapons, even long guns, and on and on and on. We have a lot of restrictions in Connecticut already. I want to state from the outset that I honestly have no love for the item known as a bump stock. I'm someone that carries a pistol permit, and I've been involved in the shooting sports most of my life. And I will tell you that a bump stock is it's an anathema to the notion of what people consider to be good uses of firearms for target practice, for hunting, for personal safety, for protection. A bump stock is something that actually makes a gun less accurate, which strikes me as an odd thing for anyone to want. The thing is that this bill is not about bump stocks. It's actually about my constituents and what their rights are. And I want to speak to that, but before I even get started, I think it would be helpful, since no one has really talked about this, and I spend most of today talking to a lot of people about the subject of bump stocks, and almost no one can even tell me what it is. But it seems like there are a great many people ready to ban them. When a firearm is discharged, there is recoil. Basically, it's one of Newton's laws, I think. Object in motion has an equal and opposite reaction. So when the bullet leaves the barrel, the gun actually recoils backwards. And if you hold your finger in just the right way against the trigger, you can actually allow that recoil of the gun to reset the trigger and fire another round. And that's something that is known as bump firing. It's not something that people typically practice, but it is something that can be done with a firearm without the requirement or addition of any other type of device. There are also countless videos that you could witness on YouTube, and I would encourage anyone watching this to take a couple of minutes and see that the act of bump firing a firearm can be done with no accessories whatsoever. It can be done with something as simple as a belt you might wear around your waist. And essentially what it does is it uses the energy of the recoil of the firearm for the purpose of making the trigger bump up against your finger. So the bump stock itself is a product that was created for the purpose of making it easier to produce this effect. I'll just point out that a bump stock is just a plastic thing, and by itself it does not shoot bullets, it does not contain bullets, and is completely and utterly useless without a firearm. It's essentially what I would describe as a gun part or an accessory. And since we already regulate firearms heavily in the state, and particularly rifles, it's interesting to me that we would bother to try and regulate an accessory for that rifle, since the rifle would already be potentially banned or at least regulated significantly. The bump stocks that are currently sold are marketed and produced to work with rifles. And I think that's an interesting point, because it's an odd thing to do to ban an accessory for rifles, because it's almost an odd thing to ban rifles themselves, because rifles are not typically used in the commission of crime or certainly criminal murder. I have some statistics that I put together by looking at the FBI website, and what I found out was that in 2016, which is the last year that we have actual real statistics for as a nation, there were 374 murders committed with a rifle. But if you put that in perspective, there were 1,604 murders committed with knives. So considering that rifles are very rarely used in crime, and we already regulate rifles, it's interesting to me that we want to regulate an accessory. And I guess the reason why is because people have this reaction that this object could be used to create harm. And I'm sympathetic to that also, but there are a great many other objects that can be used to cause harm that we are not going after in this ban of private property. There is not a single person in this room that wants to see murder or the death of another person or another school shooting or another mass shooting anywhere. And there is a legitimate difference of opinion about what the rights of our citizens are as far as our Constitution goes, and to the degree we allow our governments to create laws to regulate them. That's a legitimate policy debate, and I'm very sympathetic to that, and I am very happy any chance I get to sit down and talk to people about these things. But sadly, what I'm hearing is not a discussion about what is proper policy to ensure the safety of our citizens. What I'm hearing is a lot of hyperbole. The governor of this state went so far as to say that people who do not support his gun control efforts have blood on their hands. Nothing is more absurd than that. There are a lot of decent, law-abiding citizens in this state who oppose gun control. And many of them are the same people who would run into a building or a school to save the lives of other citizens. And I would argue that their very existence deters crime anyway. As I said, there are plenty of other things in this world that people can think are pointless. I totally get it. If I'm someone who has no interest in firearms, if I am someone that has no interest in target shooting or hunting, I may look at people who own firearms and say, that's ridiculous. You have no use or need for that. But I guess that's all about perspective, because I have no use for knitting needles, for instance. But a knitting needle could be used as a weapon, and probably has. And I would argue probably has been used in more crimes than bump stocks. There is no reason for a lot of things if your perspective is only about your own experience. There are people who think that other people shouldn't smoke or should not drink sugary drinks, or there's no reason to own a car that goes over 100 miles an hour. There are a lot of things out there that are potentially dangerous or harmful to us. But the question is, where does this body begin and end at deciding what is okay for my neighbors to do that may or may not be harmful to them? And I want to be the conscience of this legislature when it comes to reminding everyone that we were not elected to be the lords of our constituents. We do not get to tell them what they think or what they can have. We work for them. Our constituents are the ones with the rights that are protected by our founding documents, both in our U.S. and state constitution. They are the ones that employ us to make policy. And I don't think it's our job to start banning things because there is a segment of the public that doesn't like them, especially when they are reacting based on emotion and not any actual reflection on the data before them about what is actually causing the problem. There is a reason why our founders drafted our founding documents in the way they did. They wanted to make sure that what happened when the British government abused the colonists never occurred again. And if you look at our founding documents, you can read some of the list. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, you can look at the list of the things that were done to the colonists and the reason why they chose to have a revolution and start their own country. And when they put together our U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights was drafted, and I think largely because they wanted to make sure that we do not forget what the rights of individual citizens are. And the Bill of Rights is designed to restrain the government from being able to interfere with those rights. The First Amendment says the government cannot shut you up. You have a right to free speech. The Second Amendment says that you have a right to defend and protect yourself and your property. That's what it's for. The notion is that America is a country for free people, for free citizens who call the shots, who make the rules, who put together a government that's responsible to them. And sometimes I feel like people that I share this building with think that the government's here to decide for people. And that is not our role. That has never been our role. And we need to get back to the terms that we all swore an oath to. We shouldn't also be making policy based on the opinions of some people. There are lots of people that have individual types of rights and lifestyles. There are people that are into all kinds of different hobbies. There are people that choose to engage in different types of sports or activities that other people might not think are important. There are people that choose to do all sorts of manner of things. And if we are going to pick and choose which of those things are okay, I think we have lost sight of what our role is. I also want to point out there is a very big distinction between people who lawfully own guns and gun crime and criminals with guns. There's a lot of research on this subject, and if you look it up, you will find out that people that have pistol permits and lawfully own firearms have a much lower crime rate than the average population. So people who own guns lawfully are not the problem. I asked myself why I wanted to speak on this bill today, and I was reminded of something that I read recently that was written by, it was just a quote from an article from a woman. Her name is Joyce Lee Malcolm, and she is just an American like the rest of us who, as a history student, got involved in writing papers about our Constitution and began to find an interest in why our Second Amendment exists. And she wrote at least one book on the subject that basically explains where our right to bear arms comes from. And it's fascinating because it's all about the rights of citizens to defend and protect themselves from one another, from an aggressor like another country invading us, and from our own government. And she goes through and cites countless different types of historical incidences and the evolution, essentially, of what became our Second Amendment. But I don't want to get into that. What I wanted to say is what she said, the reason why she got involved and did it was exactly the same reason why I'm speaking here before you today. And her quote was, "Something deep inside of me says that people never should be victims. And they never should be put in the position of being disarmed by their government." Made me think of a whole bunch of things when I first saw that. And that quote comes back to me over and over in this room because we have bills in the Judiciary Committee that cover a wide range. And one of the most common topics is domestic violence. I don't think people realize just how important firearms have been to prevent crime over time, and just how much of a great equalizer the invention of the firearm has been. There's an old quote that says that God created man, but it was Samuel Colt that made them equal. The whole point of that really is that if you are a modestly sized female and you are in a position of being attacked from a much larger male, a firearm, it may be your only defense. And there are countless, literally countless, documented incidents of people protecting themselves with firearms. You can't go a day in the whole country without having some documented incident that someone stops a crime because there is a licensed, permitted firearm owner. The reason why we call the police when things go bump in the night is because we want somebody who is in a position to defend our situation. And it's precisely because they're armed. One of the things that happened right after Parkland, which I thought was fabulous, was that some local police departments started just naturally, without being told by this body, they adopted a policy of doing drive-bys and stopping in at all of the schools in their districts and just making sure there was a police cruiser sitting there, spending a little bit of time going in back and forth and doing it in an unpredictable fashion. And to me, that's a very smart policy because it basically says to anyone that might threaten the safety of the children or the faculty of that school that there is a chance that that cop could be there at the time that you come. I think that's a great lesson for us. So I said I wasn't going to speak too long, and I don't want to. I just want to get back to the notes that I have here and address a couple of concerns that I have with the language in the bill. So, as I said, I just got a new copy of this bill, and I'm very pleased to see that the most offensive part of the language, which was in lines 17 and 18 of the previous draft, that would have essentially included great many more items than bump stocks, has been eliminated. I still think the language is a little vague because it doesn't specifically itemize bump stocks. It says any device, component, part, combination of parts, attachment, or accessory. And then it basically goes through and says essentially things that could increase the ability for a firearm to fire more rapidly than it otherwise would. As I said, I don't see a purpose for bump stocks, but I also don't see that we have the right to arbitrarily tell citizens of our state what they can or cannot own. And I guess that is the one thing I wanted to mention is in line 2. This bill goes a lot farther than the other gun control items that we've done in the past, even things on assault weapons. This bill goes so far as to say that no person may sell, offer to sell, otherwise transfer, or offer to transfer, purchase, and then the word possess. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, what the plan is if we are banning the possession of objects that citizens own. Is there going to be a process to retrieve these? I know that there's some language in the bill about notifying people that they need to return them or turn them in or destroy them or in some way. But are we going to resort to sending law enforcement door to door to collect these items? I think it's a very, very bold move, if I could put it any other way, to ban the possession of things that are currently lawful when we don't even do that for firearms. Forgive me, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to get back to my notes, and I have a couple of amendments that I want to run. So, as I said, really, the issue I take with this bill more than anything is that this bill essentially is capitalizing on a recent, very emotional situation, and it is finds its origin in politics and not policy. I've actually spent a lot of time considering what we could and should do to make our state safer, make our citizens safer, make our schools safer. And it's interesting, I put out a press release just recently on that subject, and I'm trying to find my notes on it, that addressed some of the things that we ought to do. And what was sad about it is that the couple of news outlets that printed my op-ed, where I itemized a lot of things like school resource officers and attention to mental health, only took out one quote from my entire document. And it was where I said that the gun control efforts that have been made across the country in recent years have not done anything to make us any safer. And of course, that was taken out to be ridiculed. But what I thought was funny is that just a few days after, I found an article in the Washington Post where they fact-checked another individual who made the exact same claim. And I'd be happy to share with the members of the committee the Washington Post article, but you can search it. It's regarding Marco Rubio's claim that no recent mass shootings would have been prevented by gun laws. And they actually go through and they fact-check Mr. Rubio, and they determine that he's absolutely correct. I defy anyone to point to anything that we passed in the wake of the Sandy Hook tragedy that would have prevented that crime. And the bans that we are putting together on firearms year after year typically only make life difficult for people that would never, ever cause a problem. There's some things I'm in favor of. The universal background checks. I'm in favor of universal background checks, but I will tell you that universal background checks are largely ineffective. And the reason why is that they're not really universal. Universal background checks are voluntary. If the chairman and I want to exchange a firearm, we are going to, because we're honest, law-abiding citizens, we're going to run down to the gun store and we're going to fill out our paperwork and pay our fees, and we are going to get our background check and we'll be approved and on our way. But criminals that are about to commit some horrible crime, whether it's something small like robbing a local store, or they're going to commit mass murder, when they exchange firearms at 3 a.m. in some dark parking lot, they're not going to do that. So universal background checks are not universal. They rely on the willingness of citizens to follow through. We banned magazine capacity in this state. One of the most ridiculous things I could ever possibly imagine. Think about this for a second, ladies and gentlemen. We passed a law that says you can only have 10 bullets in your gun. Okay, so imagine a guy who is about to go rob a store, sitting in his car, moments before he's going to commit this act. And he's preparing, he's putting his ski mask on, and he starts loading his firearm, which can take 17 rounds as most modern handguns can. Do you think for 1 second he's going to stop at 10 bullets? Of course he's not. It's ridiculous. But I'll tell you what, you know who's going to have 10 bullets? The guy who's going to have 10 bullets is you or me or anyone else who actually obeys the law, who does not want to end up a felon, who is just simply trying to protect their family and might end up in a situation to have to do that 3 a.m. in the morning when some people break into their homes. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I think someone's trying to speak with me. Can I have just a moment?
Sure. Committee will stand at ease.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise I'm wrapping up. I'm going to get to my amendments in just a moment. All right, so the overarching issue here is that I think that we as a deliberative body have a real opportunity. I think in the wake of that tragedy in Florida and just in general looking at the problem of violence in our society, we have a real opportunity to do something. And I would like to call on my colleagues to actually work with me to develop policy that is dedicated to fighting gun violence in our state. I don't know if you guys have read, but Hartford's murder rate doubled in 17. And we, again, have a tremendous amount of protection against gun control. And that is largely because of illegal firearms trafficked in our state. So, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment that I would like to distribute. I don't know how we want to go about this. Can I give this to the clerk to hand them out?
Sure. Do you have ample copies for the committee?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
The amendment that is being handed out is a very simple amendment. It would strike the underlying language of the bill and would give us an opportunity to redirect our priorities in the state to do something about gun violence. This bill would eliminate the Citizens Election Program, which is the money that we spend on bumper stickers and mailings during campaigns. And instead, it would restore funding for the statewide firearms trafficking task force, which I will just mention is a program designed to stop the illegal trade of firearms, which is the source of the murders and violence in our state. And coincidentally, was only funded for 1 year after Sandy Hook. I can't even imagine when I found out that we only funded this program in 2014 and then it ended up somehow not in the state budget the following biennium. I was kind of shocked. It would also provide money for grants to towns across the state for school resource officers. I actually did a lot of research, and I found out that out of 113 school districts surveyed, about 70 of them have some sort of school resource officer program already. I think this is the right idea, to actually allow someone who is in a position to prevent violence in a school to actually be on site. And if we can help do that, and the choice is between whether or not we have money to spend on campaigns and take care of the safety of school children, I think that this is a smart and simple choice. And finally, because this is a considerable amount of money that goes into the Citizens Election Program, there would also be money to provide for mental health beds for people that are have been diagnosed with a position that they need to be involuntarily committed. I was hoping to talk for some time about the subject of involuntary commitment, which, after speaking with a number of mental health professionals, they identify certain people, and they would put Nicholas Cruz and Adam Lanza in the category of being subjects of sociopathic behavior, and really not falling into a category of mental illness. And the proper thing to do with them is involuntary commitment. So that's what the amendment is before us, Mr. Chairman. I'd love a roll call vote if I could have one.
Review the amendment, please.
Roll call will be ordered. Any further comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would like a minute to...
Committee will stand at ease. Okay, in the interim, yeah, Representative Walker has the floor to ask a question to the proponent of the amendment. Representative Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, I just want to know, does this bill have a fiscal note? This amendment, I'm sorry. Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Representative?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the representative. The fiscal note would be zero, because essentially what I'm attempting to do is defund one thing that shows up in our state budget and replace it with other items. So there would be no additional cost. And I would argue that even funding these things to a significant degree would probably cost less than we spend on the Citizens Election Program currently. So there may be savings to the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Walker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chairman Tong.
Mr. Chairman, I would oppose this amendment. Does not serve the purposes of the underlying bill and urge rejection of the amendment.
Thank you. Any further question on the amendment before us? Seeing none, will the clerk, the administrator, please call the roll on amendment number 1.
Can we have a second on that motion?
Sure, sorry. The motion was made. Is there a second? This is on. Senator Markley has seconded the motion. Thank you. All right, any further comments? Seeing none, the administrator, please call the roll on amendment number 1. Thank you.
Doyle.
No.
Kissel.
Yes.
Tong.
No.
Winfield.
No.
McLaughlin.
Yes.
Staffstrom.
No.
Rabimbus.
No. Oh, yes, sir.
Albus. Berger.
No.
Berthel.
Yes.
Candelora.
Yes.
Carpino.
Yes.
Conley. Curry.
No.
Caucus, no.
Cummings.
Yes.
Dillon.
No.
Dubitsky.
Yes.
Flexer.
No.
Fox.
No.
Giratana.
No.
Godfrey.
No.
Gomes.
No.
Gonzalez. Harding.
Yes.
Wong.
No.
Labriola.
Yes.
Markley.
Yes.
McCrory.
No.
McGorty.
Yes.
Morris.
No.
O'Day.
Yes.
O'Neill. Porter.
Yes.
Porter.
No.
Riley.
No.
Sampson.
Yes.
Sarah.
No.
Smith.
Yes.
Srinivasan.
Yes.
Storms.
Yes.
Suzio.
Yes.
Walker.
No.
Committee will stand at ease for a moment. Madam Administrator, please announce the tally.
40 members voting, yea 19, nay 21, 0 abstentions, 1 absent not voting.
Thank you. Representative Sampson, you have the floor. Sorry, the amendment fails. Amendment fails. Representative Sampson, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Just to follow up on that amendment, I'm disappointed that it failed because I think that a lot of the issue we have in the state is about what our priorities are. And I did not vote for the most recent state budget because I didn't agree with many of the priorities contained within. I did not like, for instance, that the aid to my towns was cut at the same time we were spending money to bail out the city of Hartford. And for that reason, Mr. Chairman, I want to offer another amendment that I believe is more inclined to ensure the safety of our citizens and particularly students in school than the banning of bump stocks. A crime has never been committed in the state of Connecticut. No one has ever been convicted of a crime using a bump stock. And we have the opportunity right now, right here, to actually fund things that would make a difference. We can get the program that helps get illegal guns out of our cities into law. We could do it right now. We can also provide grants to towns so they can have school resource officers to protect their students. And we can provide for some actual effort on mental health so that we can maybe take the dangerous mass shooter type person off the street if the time comes. My amendment that I will distribute like the last one is identical, except that this time the funding source to pay for school resource officers, fund the statewide trafficking task force, and the mental health beds is to defund the bailout that we provide for the city of Hartford. And I make a motion that this be adopted, and I'd like a roll call vote, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, roll call is ordered. Again, the motion made by Representative Sampson. Is there a second? Is there a second? Representative Smith. Okay, is the amendment being passed out? Yeah, and I would ask Representative Sampson to contemplate passing out all the amendments. You know, however many amendments he has, if we could start passing them out so we don't have to wait. But Representative Sampson, are you done? We'll let you proceed with your explanation of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I've already said what it does.
All right, so the committee will stand at ease to pass out these amendments, and then Representative Sampson, if you could get your other amendments available to pass out after this so we can keep the ship moving. Thank you. Committee will stand at ease for a moment. For the record, it was SHIP, S-H-I-P, Representative Walker. Okay, at this point in time, I believe the committee has the amendment number B. Any further discussion? Chairman Tong.
Mr. Chairman, as with the last amendment, I don't think this is really germane to the purpose of the underlying bill, and I urge a no vote on this amendment.
Thank you. Any further comment from the committee? Seeing none. Okay, I would ask the administrator to call a roll call vote on Amendment B.
Doyle. No. Kissel.
Yes.
Tom.
No.
Winfield.
No.
McLaughlin.
Yes.
Stavstrom.
No.
Verbimbis.
Yes.
Albus.
No.
Berger.
No.
Berthel.
Yes.
Candelora.
Yes.
Carpino. Conley. Curry.
No.
Cummings.
Yes.
Dillon. Dubinsky.
Yes.
Flexer.
No.
Fox.
No.
Giordano.
No.
Godfrey. Gomes.
No.
Gonzalez. Harding.
Yes.
Wong. Laviola.
Yes.
Markley.
Yes.
McCrory. McGordy.
Yes.
Morris.
No.
Representative Dillon. No. Thank you.
No.
Thank you.
Carpino, yes.
O'Day.
Yes.
O'Neill.
Yes.
Porter. Riley.
No.
Sampson.
Yes.
Sarah.
No.
Smith.
Yes.
Srinivasan.
Yes.
Storms.
Yes.
Suzio.
Yes.
Walker.
No. Porter.
And Carpino, yes.
Okay, at this point, I'd ask the clerk to please announce the tally.
On Amendment B, 39 members voting, yea 19, nay 20, 0 abstentions, absent not voting 2.
Thank you. Amendment fails. Moving on, Representative Sampson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the committee offering me the time that it has, and I am going to wrap up very quickly. I just have a couple of quick comments, and I will offer one final amendment, and we will be able to vote on the bill or let others speak to it. I just want to remind people how I started this conversation, complaining that I believe the bill before us is about politics. And I'm sorry that it's come to this. I think that that debate is frankly beneath us. We owe it to our constituents to do better. You know, people came here and rallied at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago, and I talked to some of them. And they weren't here because they wanted to ban bump stocks. They were here because they want us, Republicans and Democrats, to work together to make our state a safer place. That's what they want. And it might be easy to put out a soundbite that says this or that person voted no against bump stocks or this and that, and they don't care. That's baloney. No one in this room wants to see another murder or mass shooting in any way. No one wants to see anyone do anything to commit a horrible crime with a gun. And if that kind of dialogue continues, I fear for this body and our ability to work together to ever do anything that is productive for the citizens of this state. The amendments I just offered, I'm sorry they failed because they would have made our state safer. Those were legitimate things that need to happen. School resource officers in schools will save lives. When and if it happens, someone goes to a school, they will be stopped. It happened just recently in another state. Putting money into the statewide trafficking task force needs to happen. Even though it didn't happen in this amendment, it needs to happen in the next budget that is passed in our state. If we care about getting illegal guns off the streets to save lives, especially in our major cities, we need to put that in the budget. We need to address mental health also. These are the things that people want to see us do, and they want to see us work together to do it. What they don't want to see is artificial fixes and politics. The fact is that private firearm ownership makes the world a safer place. People stop crime just by owning firearms. I live in a rural district, and I will tell you that the reason why we don't have more break-ins and home invasions than we do is because anyone that would consider coming to my neighborhood probably would have to consider that myself or my neighbors are armed. That's just one example. When we start setting up places in our world like schools and saying, hey, there's no guns here, no one's going to stop you, I wouldn't say it's an invitation, but it's certainly not as much of a deterrent as a school resource officer would be to preventing something from bad happening in that school. So I'm with the chairman and I'm with the proponents of this bill on the fact that I don't ever want to see anyone use a bump stock to harm another person. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have the amendment that I'm going to offer, which says essentially that we are not going to ban bump stocks, but we are going to make it a Class D felony, a serious, serious crime when a bump stock is actually used in the commission of a crime. This allows people that would use them lawfully for purposes other than causing harm to still retain them, but it would properly and I think more appropriately go after a potential problem, which I will remind everyone has not happened in our state. We're talking about bump stocks when we're not talking about school resource officers and getting illegal guns off the street like I want to. I make a motion to move this amendment, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like a roll call again.
Yep. Roll call be ordered. Who made it? There's a second? Second. Representative Dubinsky made the second. Any further discussion? Chairman Tong.
Again, Mr. Chairman, I think that this strike all amendment defeats the overall purpose of the bill, and I urge rejection.
Thank you. Any further comments from the committee? Seeing none, may the administrator please call the roll on Amendment C.
Doyle?
No.
Kissel?
Yes.
Tom?
No.
Winfield?
No.
McLaughlin?
Yes.
Statstrom?
No.
Rabimbus?
Yes.
Albus?
No.
Berger?
No.
Berthel?
Yes.
Candelora?
Yes.
Carpino?
Yes.
Conley?
No.
Curry?
No.
Cummings?
Yes.
Dillon? Dubinsky?
Yes.
Flexer?
No.
Fox?
No.
Giordano?
No.
Godfrey?
No.
Gomes?
No.
Gonzalez? Harding?
Yes.
Wong? Labriola?
Yes.
Markley?
Yes.
McCrory? McGordy?
Yes.
Morris?
No.
O'Day?
Yes.
O'Neill?
Yes.
Porter?
No.
Riley?
No.
Sampson?
Yes.
Sarah?
No.
Smith?
Yes.
Srinivasan?
Yes.
Storms?
Yes.
Suzio?
Yes.
Walker?
No.
Okay, will the administrator please announce the tally?
Thirty-nine members voting, yea 19, nay 20, 0 abstentions, 2 absent not voting.
Thank you. The amendment fails. Any further, Representative Sampson?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm disappointed that the amendment failed. I'm hopeful that there'll be some more conversation on this bill, and in the end of the day, we will open our hearts and our minds and decide to do something that is actually constructive about making our citizens safer and concentrate on prevention and intervention when it comes to gun violence. The chairman mentioned that the amendment that failed did not meet with the purpose of the bill, but the purpose of the bill is to take things away from law-abiding citizens potentially, and the amendment was to punish criminals who would use the same object for harm. I don't understand how those things work together. I will just close by saying I hope this bill is modified before it passes, but in the event that it's not, I will oppose it. And the reason why, Mr. Chairman, is that I have three reasons, really. One is I don't believe banning bump stocks makes anyone one iota safer, period. I don't think it makes one bit of difference. If a criminal's intent on doing something, he was either going to illegally obtain a bump stock or drive over the border and get one and bring it back, or he's going to use something else. Taking things away from law-abiding citizens does not solve any problems ever. The second reason is that I swore an oath to protect both the state and U.S. constitutions to say that citizens, my constituents, have the right to keep and bear arms, an individual right. And I don't think I am so special that I have the right to break that oath. And finally, when it comes to the rights of my constituents, I will do pretty much anything my constituents ask me to do ever. That's my job as their representative. But the one thing I will never do, Mr. Chairman, is I will never vote to take the rights of my constituents away, even if they ask me to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.